Hello there. It's time for Grandma Weldy Reads, and look what I have today. I got another book in the mail from my son, and this one I have never read. All right. Oh my goodness, I've never read this. Eric Carle, Mr. Seahorse. Eric Carle wrote Mr. Seahorse. Oh my goodness! How cute is this? I cannot wait to read aloud Mr. Seahorse for you. It's called Mr. Seahorse by Eric Carle. In fact, I didn't really recognize the author's name, so I looked up to see if I could find anything else he had written. And do you know what? He wrote a book I'm sure you have read, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. That's right. And he illustrated Brown Bear, Brown Bear. He has an interesting way of doing his illustrations. What he does is he takes tissue paper and then paints on it and cuts the tissue paper out into the shape that he wants. And he'll use many pieces of tissue paper. Maybe you could try that at home. Let's read Mr. Seahorse by Eric Carle. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. "It's time for me to lay my eggs," she said. "Well, can I help?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, yes, thank you," said Mrs. Seahorse, and she laid her eggs into a pouch on Mr. Seahorse's belly. "I'll take good care of our eggs," said Mr. Seahorse. "I promise." As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a group of trumpet fish hidden in a patch of reeds. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Stickleback?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, delighted," replied Mr. Stickleback. "I just built a nest and right away Mrs. Stickleback laid her eggs into it. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "Keep up the good work," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a lionfish hidden behind a coral reef. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Tilapia?" asked Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia couldn't answer. His mouth was full of eggs. I know," said Mr. Seahorse. "Mrs. Tilapia laid her eggs, and now you're taking good care of them until they hatch." Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. "Well, you must be very happy," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam on his way. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a pair of leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Curtis?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, perfectly fine," replied Mr. Curtis. "Mrs. Curtis laid her eggs, and I have stuck them on my head. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "You're doing a good job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a stonefish hidden behind a rock. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Pipe?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, I couldn't be better," replied Mr. Pipe. "Mrs. Pipe laid her eggs along my belly, and now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "You should feel proud of yourself," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Bullhead?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, tip-top," replied Mr. Bullhead. "Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs, and the eggs hatched, and now I'm babysitting." "Oh, you're doing a fine job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. The time had come for the Seahorse babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse wiggled and twisted this way and that. At last the babies tumbled out of Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back into the pouch. "Oh no," said Mr. Seahorse. "I do love you, but now you are ready to be on your own." Wasn't that an interesting book? I found it so interesting that I had to look up about the fish that carried the eggs in their mouth and on their back and then by the side of their head. I had known that the seahorse, the daddy seahorse, carries the eggs in a pouch, but I didn't know about the stickleback. He defends and protects those eggs so nothing mean or terrible could happen to them. Isn't that wonderful? And the catfish, there's one, the bullhead one, he'll build the nest and he guards that nest. And the sea catfish has those eggs in his mouth. The tilapia, some of them carry in the mouth, some of them just put the eggs in the bottom of a pond. What an amazing creation we live in, designed by a wonderful creator. Keep reading and keep learning.